Hello and welcome back from the break, back to today's episode of Perspective, a quarter-final episode where we have two very strong teams debating on the topic of votes at 16. So just to recap, we have EYC Group 1 who are against the topic, and we have the Freedom Fighters who today are debating for the topic. So we are entering into our second phase of today's episode. In this phase, like I previously described, we're going to be having the actual debate, so both teams are going to be responding to each other's arguments. So without further ado, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get straight into it, and I'm going to ask the Freedom Fighters, could one of you guys please give your opening statement?
I'd like to say that I don't think teenagers can get easily influenced by things, because I think they have the potential to have a really strong knowledge on this subject, which is the citizenship and also electing. I do think that teenagers are not necessarily not ready, because I feel like they can have that experience if it's exposed to them. If this were to ever happen, where 16-year-olds would be allowed to vote, then we obviously would encourage lots of teachings about this topic. So that's my argument.
Okay, so 16-year-olds, some people may say that they're not knowledgeable enough on the topic, but if they are given the chance, they can be taught about things such as politics, government, and how the country is run in schools, so they can be well equipped with the knowledge to go off and vote. Can you guys please respond to that?
I would like to argue with your point by saying most 16-year-olds are not experienced enough, whereas some are. But what I wanted to say is that those who are experienced enough don't have the maturity, and they have a lack of interest in politics. Alright, 16-year-olds have a lack of interest in politics, not knowing who or what their vote affects. They would only vote to benefit themselves.
Okay, so even if 16-year-olds are taught about the topic, there's still going to be a few who just don't have any interest in it at all. And so how would you respond to that, regardless of whether they're taught about politics or not?
Well, I'd like to counter that argument and say it's not just teenagers that are not experienced or get too easily influenced by different things in the media, for example. I mean, we've seen in past elections, like when Trump was getting his presidency, that lots of people do just vote just because they want to. And it's not young people, it's not 16-year-olds that were voting in that election, was it? It was people that were above that age. It was people that were 30, maybe that they're working. So I don't think that that's a really fair argument, because adults do that too. You're stereotyping teenagers, and you're a teenager. So I don't really see how that makes sense.
So in a way, would you let a 12-year-old vote because it affects their education, or would you let a toddler vote because it affects their health system? You won't, because they're still children, and you will rely on their parents to make responsible decisions for them. And like maturity, they haven't actually matured to full capacity. You would wait for them to actually grow up, get out of school, experience the real world, and you'll let them vote.
Okay, so if a 16-year-old can vote, why can't a 12-year-old vote?
Well, that's different, because at the age of 16, what do? We all finish school by that time, and we're forced to think of a career that by the age of 40 we had that job. They're telling us that we can't even vote. That's a bit ridiculous, you know. We have to think about a career, but like something that's so far ahead, but we can't vote for someone that will probably just last for 4 years.
Oh, sure. Well, go ahead and do it.
Thank you. I'd like to say that 16-year-olds are given the opportunity. They are allowed to be blood donors. They're allowed to be parents, because they can get married. They're allowed to join the armed forces. I mean, these are such big steps in their life that people my age could be making in their lives, but they're not allowed to vote because they're immature.
Go ahead, Raphael.
16-year-olds are allowed to enlist to the army at age of 16, but are not allowed to join the front lines. This shows us the start.
This shows us the start of their maturity by making their choice, but it also proves that they are not mature enough to actually do them in practical.
Yeah, go on.
As you said, maturity, or like we have to experience it, but we're still in school, and like we need to focus on that. And if we vote at such young age, it affects not just us but everyone else. Like right now we're speaking about only us, but wouldn't it affect that other people, or elderly people, or like younger people, if you make one huge decision on deciding on who to vote?
Would you like to respond to that?
But do you know what voting is for? We're voting for our future. And you know how all the prime ministers and all that, they said they want to change the world and help the generation, right? We are the generation. We are the future. So we know what the future needs. So I think it's unfair if we don't have the right to say it, because in the end it's about us.
Okay, I'm gonna call an end to that string of debate there. So that was getting quite heated myself, but it was enjoyable to watch. So I asked the freedom fighters to give an opening statement. So now I'm going to come to EYC Group 1. Can I ask one of you guys to give your opening argument, please?
I would like to say, unless there are precautions put on what age people should vote, most people won't mature, and it can affect not just England's standards, but the whole world, and people's attitude towards each other. We also need to give 16-year-olds time to mature and not have a heavy heavy responsibility burdened upon them, even though they don't see it that way.
Okay, so as Daniel said, allowing immature people to vote can affect the status of the country as a whole, and it may prove to be a burden on the shoulders of a young 16-year-old.
I'd like to respond to that by saying that teenagers who are 16 don't necessarily have to vote. It's an option. I'd like to say that 16-year-olds that are passionate about it, like people in this room right now, I think they should be the ones to vote. You don't have to vote if you don't want to. That's not compulsory. It's an option, because if you're passionate about something, you should say something. It shouldn't be that, oh, because you're immature, because you're 16 and I'm going to stereotype you saying that you're immature and you can't handle this. That's stupid, in my opinion. I think if you're saying that, then I think at least give the people who do deserve that option to have it.
Yeah, sure.
As a young person myself, I'm part of the UK Youth Council, and I know a lot of young people who are enjoy talking about politics and are really infused by it. I think that there's quite a majority of young people who are not immature, but they are quite experienced by what politics is, like as a young person to themselves. It means a lot to us young people. It's going to have effect to our futures. So whatever happens, politics shouldn't be. So there wouldn't be. You can't say that a lot of immature people would choose the wrong thing within politics. Like they would vote for something that's bad for the rest of the other young people who are voting for something that's good for their own lives.
Oh, can I add to that as
Oh,
well?
sure, go ahead.
Sorry, you just reminded me of something. I'd like to say that it's not just people that are interested in politics, it's also young people that are interested in helping out their communities. I mean, for example, I'm a police cadet myself, and we always do volunteering things just to help out our communities, because we care about where we live in, we care about the place and the world that we live in. And I think that's really important for teenagers to actually get into, because I may be an exception, but other people could potentially be interested in that. If they had the opportunity to be able to vote, then they would be curious, wouldn't they? I mean, there's teenagers, they might not know much about it, but they would want to, right? And I think giving an option just opens so many more doors for them. It makes them think about different things that they could do.
Thank you very much, Freedom Fighters. A very strong response there. So the whole idea of a burden, voting isn't forced. If you don't want to do it, you don't have to do it. And in terms of being making an immature vote, the whole idea of politics and voting is such a volatile area anyway, that there is already immature people voting. So what's wrong with letting 16-year-olds vote?
But how can you believe those who are passionate about politics would vote? What about those who are immature? They could do it for bants. As you can see, this year Hella Bants has been, a real good thing in YouTube.
Okay, so the whole idea of taking voting as a joke. You said that people don't have to vote. if they feel pressured. But some people may feel like, you know, I've got the vote, so I might as well use it. Let me vote for, you know, a random party, just so I can joke about it with my friends later on. What would you say to that?
Well, I think that it's not just young people that do that. I mean, there's been so many ridiculous incidents within lots of different elections where there's just random things. It's not necessarily because of teenagers that are doing immature things, it's adults as well. I mean, you can't just say it's just 16-year-olds because they want to have fun, they want to have bants. Adults want to have bants as well.
Yeah, there are many immature adults out there as well. It's not just the younger generation that are immature.
I would like to say, if it's a question of maturity, researchers agree that the brain is still developing until their mid-20s, so it's more likely for people under 20 to be more immature and have bants than adults.
So the whole idea of bants comes back again. So, as he said, he used a fact that researchers agree that the brain is still developing until the age of 20.
So a 20-year-old is allowed to have bants, but a 16-year-old can't.
I never said that, but
Not all 20-year-olds are the same, and not all of them would be doing banting around. It's like you're saying there could be, so I'm 16 and I might be good at talking about politics, but then there might be a 14-year-old who knows a lot more about politics that I wouldn't know.
But I was saying that the brain is still not mature enough, so I'm just stating a fact that would be more likely to an age.
Yeah, and the fact that adults are already doing it, if you're going to let younger children who like are more immature to do it as well, wouldn't that make the voting not as much important? It's like there's no actual importance of the whole topic, and like you should like you don't really know if it's gonna be a fair vote or if it's just gonna be like just vote for anyone as a joke or anything.
I think Raphael you want to add? Raphael, can I ask you to?
But who's more, if you think about it, who's more mature, 16-year-olds or 20-year-olds?
Can I answer that?
Yeah,
Okay.
go ahead.
Well, first I'd like to say again, stereotyping, again, discrimination, ageist is a really big thing that's going on with you guys. I'd like to say that you're saying that because of the brain development and things like that, people, 16-year-olds are less likely to care about the government. Well, if you look at the government that's already here, that exists, already a third of the people that are registered to vote in 2015 didn't. I mean, that is such a huge number. That could have changed the whole entire election around. There's adults that don't care as well. You can't just say just because of brain development, that's the only reason why young people can't vote. There's so many more reasons. And plus, also, there's 1.6 million young people in this world that's 16 to 17. That's so many more people that the election can be engaging for. And I'd like to say that if there were 1.6 million young people that did vote or didn't, for example, it still could potentially increase the turnout of the election because more people have to be introduced to this thing.
Okay, Daniel, if you do have a response, I'm going to have to ask you to make it a very brief one.
I would like to say 18 to 24-year-olds age group have the least turnout for vote turnout. There is evidence for this in the 2015 votes, as you can see here. The younger people who are allowed to vote have the least turnout, so this can have a big impact on the younger generation.
Can I please add to that?
It has to be very brief.
Okay.
Very brief.
I'd like to say that 16-year-olds, they're closer to the school age, so that means they could have the education. They could have really good knowledge about this topic, where they could increase the turnout because they'd care more about it. I mean, if you're 18 and then you had a lesson on politics when you're 13, you'll probably forget that stuff. But if you're 16, you're more likely to have that knowledge still fresh in your memory.
Okay, I'm going to have to call an end to that string of debate and an end for this phase. We've seen some very, very strong arguments. Both teams, speaking very well. I'm pretty sure the judges are impressed. And as we can see, it was getting very, very heated. So I think we should have a break to allow it to cool down.